I'm here today with my very good friend, George Bell, who is the CEO of Jumptap. Listen, you've pretty much done it all, and we'll talk about your latest situation in a minute. If you're talking to an audience of young entrepreneurs today, what would be some of the tidbits of advice you would give them?
I'm pretty traditional in the sense that I believe you have to try to define and understand what gets you excited first. I think if you put the money piece in front of everything, like my goal is to make a lot of money, I suppose that works from time to time, but in my experience, what you don't end up with is a genuineness around the enterprise. You know, genuineness in an enterprise comes from a passion for either a product, a breakthrough, a disruption of some kind, you know, and that, of course, is the privilege of the small company, is to attack the status quo. And if you don't have courage and passion to do it, because God knows the odds are against you, right. I can promise you no amount of money will ultimately give you that. You know, so I think one is to have conviction, you know, number one. Number two is the greatest entrepreneurs that I've observed can hold these two conflicting ideas in their mind all the time. One is you have to have an unrealistic view of the potential of your success. You have to believe that you will beat the odds. On the other hand, you almost always start out losing money. So you also have to be very realistic about cash consumption, because when you run out of, these companies keep going until they run out of money. Mm-hmm. That's it. What stops you in your tracks is when you run out of money, right? And everything kind of keeps going until you do. So another part of your mind has to be hyper realistic about your balance sheet and the use of cash, and when you market and don't market, when you expand your hiring and don't expand your hiring, when do you know enough about your product that you know you can pour on more resources and expand it without diminishing your economics and so forth. So it's odd because I've seen the best of these entrepreneurs be quite out of touch in the sense that their mission will conquer everything in the face of odds, while being also hyper in touch about the realistic issues around cash and P&L. And it's an odd combination. And, you know, not everybody's DNA is made that way, but I think the best of the people I've seen run these companies can do that.
Let me ask you this: who do you admire most?
I think I admire most the people that have, the entrepreneurs that have persisted in the face of either failure, or the ones that have sort of proven that their way of seeing the world can indeed be validated or accurate. You know, Bezos at Amazon, who's just sort of stuck in there and persisted. He's a 16, 17 year CEO now at Amazon. It's very unlikely that the first CEO of even the best company stays. You know, I mean, he's employee number one and he's still there. People have berated Groupon, but Groupon broke into a new model, did some crazy things, but you know, it broke through. You know, it really disrupted something, right? So, I think disruption is sometimes easy to see. It's very difficult to execute because people also underestimate the entrenched cultural issues that work against you. You know, we were talking about your business earlier, and the entrenched commitment that recruiters might have to their own software, or to HR departments have to their own way of doing things. And you find that when you want to disrupt, you have to both cajole and do things that coerce the customer base into believing that not that much is changing, while you have to believe actually quite a lot is changing.
Yeah, without a doubt. Tell me a little bit about you're going to General Catalyst.
So when I came back from Silicon Valley, we came principally for personal reasons, meaning I grew up, you know, in New England, and we liked to go up to Maine in the summer, and my wife was pretty much the same. And so we came back and we went to Boston ultimately. And I think, you know, my first thought was to do nothing for a while and decompress. And I actually was asked to look at a company in Boston called UPromise, and it was a loyalty program to help families save for college. And I was quite drawn to the mission of it. It was a for-profit, venture-backed company, but I loved the idea that it felt like a not-for-profit good. Mm-hmm. And I ended up running that company for 4 years, and then we sold that company to Sallie Mae in late 2006. And also a lot of VC investors in that. And as I said, we went through recapitalization and so forth. But that was one of those things that everybody did fine on it, and ultimately it was a company that was funded during the bubble explosion. Funding was wrong, valuation was wrong, and so forth. So it was a lot of arm wrestling to correct all that, but common sense sort of willed out over time, and we sold that company. And the General Catalyst guys were investors and asked me to come to look at and invest in consumer media with them, and they were right in Harvard Square. Easy thing to do in the sense that I thought I was ready to hang up the spurs in terms of running companies, and it seemed to me it would be time for me to sort of start to be a mentor and sit on boards and help CEOs. And I did that for a couple of years, and I ultimately had frustration with it at some level because I missed running something, or I maybe took myself out of that game earlier than I think I should have. Right. And then the chance to run Jumptap, which is a mobile advertising platform, came along because General Catalyst was its lead investor and wanted to make a CEO change and a business model change. And it was right down the street from us in Harvard Square. So it didn't require me to move. It pushed me into mobile, and I felt I could leverage everything I'd learned about in digital media and content and advertising, but I would learn again, which I love. I feel a little off balance and at my best performance when I can learn again too. So I love the idea of going into mobile as the next frontier of advertising and content and building on what I had learned at Excite and at Home and UPromise and elsewhere. So I came there 2.5 years ago.
Got you. And so, George, now with the merger or sale, what's your next move?
Well, I'm in the seat till we close the deal, which probably won't be till end of October or November, something like that. I'm going to join the board of Millennial Media. And I haven't thought too much beyond that. I actually would love to think about going back into bringing more of an entrepreneurial spirit into either the documentary businesses again or nonprofit. I think I'm less concerned at this point in my life with sort of trying to run a fifth company or a sixth company. Or I think at some point it also is a young person's game. And it's not lost on me that most of the employees at Jumptap are half or less my age. And I do think this idea of this unbridled optimism in some ways is youthful, and you can hold on to it later in life, but reality and cynicism creep in, around the expectations on these things. And I noticed that, with myself. The more of these companies I do, the more I feel like luck has played a larger role. And while that may be true, it may not also be the best formula for doing the next one.
Right, I got you. Okay, so you're up in front of the graduating class of 2014 at Harvard, and you're giving your words of wisdom to the class. What would you tell all the students?
First of all, don't rush. I think people coming out of college today are immediately concerned with the sort of fast track career development, or I need to be a founder of a company. It's amazing how many people want to brand themselves as entrepreneurs and thinking about saying, I'm going to start something, or me and my two buddies are going to start something right out of college, right? At the age of 22 or 23, you have all of the optimism you need, but you have none of the experience to understand how to balance these competing elements inside of a startup. And so I think the first thing is that if your long-term ambition is to start or run or be a principal in a company, that one of the hardest ways to do it is to come out of it right out of college without much experience of how jobs work and how the real world works. So one is, I would say, don't rush. Second is, I would say, develop themes and passions, right? And those might have been things developed on summer jobs, may have been developed by conversations around the dinner table at home about what your mom or dad does in work and whether you find that attractive or unattractive, but you pick up signals. So I think the second piece would be develop passions and biases, but listen. I mean, my career path, which has been a real zigzag, every time I've made a move, it's basically because a headhunter called or someone else had an idea of something I might be good at. So all I should credit myself for in my own path was listening well, because there's almost always someone else's idea. And I was well served by all those things, But I think people sort of get tracked into saying, I'm going to do e-commerce, or I'm going to run a logistics business, or I'm going to start a new social network of some kind, right? And I bridle against that because it's sort of like, listen first, right? Find out what can be attractive to you and what you think lines up well against your skills, and assume that there's more conversations of greater interest going on in the world that might be applicable to you than you can dream up on your own, right? So the number of voices out there that can contribute to your decisions are greater than your one voice internally, although that's the most important voice. So I would say patience, and waiting for these things to come along. And then I think, if you're lucky enough to get in a position of being some kind of an co-founder, but getting it. The other thing I'd say is, again, the worst mistakes I've seen consistently on early stage entrepreneurship is not managing the limited amount of cash against the opportunity. And this danger of, the dance stops when you run out of cash. I don't care how good the idea is. When you're out, the music's over.
Right. Well, George, great advice. George Bell, CEO of Jumptap. Can't wait to see what your next move is. Really appreciate your taking the time.
My pleasure.